This is the Jocko Underground Podcast number 12 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
Also joining us tonight is Daryl Cooper. Good evening, Daryl.
Happy to be here.
Everyone is insane. Everyone is insane. I have been thinking about this lately. The clinical definition of insanity is a mental illness of such a severe nature that a person cannot distinguish fantasy from reality, cannot conduct their affairs due to psychosis, or is subject to uncontrollable impulsive behavior. That's the clinical definition of insanity. And I was reading about someone recently that was clinically insane. And then I was also reading a book about a particular general during a war who he wasn't maybe clinically insane to this level, but his actions started to make me think that he actually does have some level of insanity because he couldn't distinguish fantasy from reality. So let's break this down a little bit because I think I'm right. What I think is everyone's insane on some level. So first of all, think about this. The first section there, cannot distinguish fantasy from reality. Cannot distinguish fantasy from reality. Okay, so you get the stereotypical person on the street that's yelling at a telephone pole or whatever, right? They're delusional. They don't think other people can see what they're doing. They think they're more capable than they are. You know, that's kind of the thing that clued me in off this whole idea was this particular military general who was doing things who didn't understand the reality of the situation that he was in. Just didn't understand it. So cannot distinguish fantasy from reality. That's part one. Part two, cannot conduct affairs due to psychosis. What does that mean? That means you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Is there anyone listening to this, Echo Charles, is there any day that you don't exactly do what you're supposed to be doing? Does that ever happen? You don't conduct your affairs the way you're supposed to? Does that ever happen to you, Daryl? Has there ever been a day where you didn't quite conduct the affairs you were supposed to do? Well,
no comment.
Okay. Subject to uncontrollable impulsive behavior. Do we even need to ask that question, right? What about a donut? What about a piece of pizza? What about the anger? What about the smashing of the kitchen counter? Uncontrollable impulsive behavior. You can't stop yourself from doing that thing at that moment. And here's the other part of this, and it's not part of the definition, but I looked it up and it is part of insanity, is that insane people don't know that they're insane. They don't know that they're insane. They're not aware of it. And this is another thing, reading about this particular military leader who didn't realize what was happening. He didn't see how obviously mistaken he was with the moves that he was making. Like anybody on the outside would look and say, oh yeah, this guy's clearly making mistake after mistake after mistake. And he didn't even realize it. Didn't even realize it. And I think what happens is, what that reminded me of is that if you allow your head to be an echo chamber for your own ideas and your own thoughts, and you only let those thoughts rattle around in there, it's not going to go well after a while. It ends up in a feedback loop. Was that a positive feedback loop? It's a positive feedback loop. It's feedback on an amplifier. What does that mean? It means we need to be able to detach. You know, if you want to distinguish fantasy from reality as a human, you got to detach from the situation you're in. If you want to conduct affairs regardless of how you're feeling, you got to detach from that. If you want to overcome your impulsive behaviors, you've got to detach. You got to be able to take a step back and detach. And by the way, if you don't do that, you don't realize your own psychosis. And this is similar from a leadership perspective. if you're in an echo chamber from a leadership perspective. If I'm the leader and I'm coming up with ideas and Echo's a yes man and Daryl's a yes man and they're saying, yeah, boss, great idea. That sounds great. Let's go ahead and do that. And no one questions me. No one pushes back. We're caught in an echo chamber of ideas and we're going to fail. Or chances are we're going to fail. So we need to push back against ourselves. We need to question ourselves. We need to remember that the reality that we see, the reality that we actually see with our own two eyes, looks different from other people's eyes. And you need to see if you can see what they're seeing. You got to remember how things look compared to what other people think they look like. You got to remember that this idea of being insane is something that we all have a tendency to lean towards, right? We fail to identify or accept reality. It's one of the things I was talking about with a bunch of businesses as COVID kicked off. There were some people that were, we're not going to be locked down. This can't last. Fast forward 6 months, 3 months, 1 year. People didn't accept the reality that they were facing. We're just going to keep doing things. It doesn't work. So we have a tendency to fail to accept reality. We have a tendency to fail to do what we're supposed to do. We have a tendency to fail to conduct our affairs. That's a tendency that we all have. We have a tendency to fail to control impulsive behavior. These are things that no one can deny these things. And we don't even recognize and realize what we're doing. So we don't even see that little bit of psychosis setting in. We don't even see that little bit of psychosis setting in where we are actually losing touch with reality. Our head's in an echo chamber. And the echo chamber amplifies the lies that we're telling ourselves. It amplifies our problems, prevents solutions. So what we have to do is we have to detach, we have to ask questions, we have to listen. Don't be a yes man to yourself. Don't let that happen. Don't let that happen. So, insanity. What do you think, Daryl? Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. I think one of the most interesting points to make to people in this respect is just like so many other qualities about people, right? Take courage, for example. You know, some guys who would run into a firefight at the drop of a hat to rescue their friend, but they don't have the courage to stand up to their wife when she's acting in a certain way or something like that, right? It's domain specific, and insanity is often domain specific. It makes me think of this one woman I knew very well. I still know her. She's a great person, very intelligent, philosophy degree, master's degree, graduated with honors in philosophy. She works in education. She's been a teacher, vice principal, and administrator, and she's the best bureaucrat that anybody who has ever worked with her has ever seen. She's great at her job. Everybody who knows her, she's brilliant. She's great. She's just a normal person. I knew her very, very well, and she had a touch of paranoia. That she was an anxious person, a little bit paranoid. Now, some people are paranoid. They think people are talking about me behind my back when they're really not interested. That's a version of it, right? But it escalates. And one time I was having a conversation with her, and she said that, I think at work, our secretary at work, she brought cookies for everybody at work the other day, or today rather. And she and this secretary had been having some problems in my friend's eyes, right? She would tell me the stories about the problems they were having, and I'm like, I don't know. I think she could have just meant that in a totally innocent way. I think maybe you're blowing it out of proportion, right? But the accumulation of those incidents led her to think that this secretary had it in for her. And so she asked me, she's like, but I didn't eat any of the cookies. And then she looks me in the eye. I'm just hearing like, okay, she brought cookies and you didn't eat a cookie. And she looks me dead in the eyes and says, do you think she was trying to poison me? And I said, listen to me very carefully. And I told her very carefully, or very seriously, I said, no, I don't think she was trying to poison you, and do not repeat that to anybody else, okay? And because that's a crazy thing to think. I mean, it was completely outside the realm of possibility. And so she didn't repeat it to anybody else. And, she even said like, yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. I was just joking. And then she kind of just went about it and nothing happened. But you think to yourself, what if I wasn't there to tell her that? And I was somebody she trusted who could get through to her to like let her know that that's not a good idea. If she had gone to her supervisors and said, I think the secretary's trying to poison me. And they would have been like, excuse me? And they would have been, and the whole thing could have escalated into something where she would have lost her job. She may have been committed to who knows? It could have really gotten out of hand. And what happens a lot of times is then maybe people think, somebody like her would think, well, everybody's in on it. They're all on her side. And that's how that kind of thing starts to escalate. That's that positive feedback loop you were talking about. And we do it on an individual level, right, where you don't want to, or you surround yourself with yes men. We do it on the group level. You think of people like cults, like Jim Jones, where, dissent is not allowed. And so there's this, you happen to have a small group with a dictator at the top, and there's nobody around who can actually criticize him or tell him he's wrong about anything. So they just go off into the stratosphere. And you see it happen with whole nations, where dissent is banned in North Korea. You can't criticize anything that's going on. And so the people at the top, if they're a little unstable, you're off to the races,
That's what had me thinking about this. That's what kind of the first thing sometimes I'm doing something and I take a note in this whole idea came from me writing down echo chambers. Because I was thinking about, well, we hear echo chambers a lot in the news. Oh, well, you're in an echo chamber on social media, right? When you're on the gram, for instance, Echo Charles, when you're on the gram, whatever you look at, it feeds you more of that food, right? It gives you more. If you're looking at liberal stuff, it's going to... That is a little excerpt of what we are doing on the Jocko Underground podcast. So if you want to continue to listen, go to jockounderground.com and subscribe. And we're doing this to mitigate our reliance on external platforms so we are not subject to their control. And we're doing it so we can give you more control, more interaction, more direct connections, better communications with us, strengthen this legion of troopers that are in the game with us. So thank you. It's jockounderground.com. It costs $8.18 a month. And if you can't afford to support us, we can still support you. Just email assistance@jockounderground.com and we'll get you taken care of. Until then, we will see you mobilized underground.